Welcome to my presentation on diagramming for admins. Today's topic is going to be delivering well-constructed and thought-out architecture diagrams. My name is Reid. I'm the emerging technology lead here at Groundswell Cloud Solutions, against this company. I've been in the industry for 10 plus years as a consultant, working with many administrators over my time. And here I'm hoping to share with you some of my experiences and some of my tips on how to improve the relationship between consultants and admins through the use of diagrams. Over the course of the next 10 to 15 minutes, we'll be talking about 5 tips. This goes from planning all the way into the design and implementation of the diagram. But before we even get started about building diagrams, we should talk about why diagrams are important. And I've already kind of hinted at this, but the first one is addressing the stakeholders' concerns. So when I say concern, I'm talking about a stakeholder has a question about the implementation, the system in which you're the administrator of, and they want to need to know more about something. And that could be really anything. And as an administrator, as someone that can go and build diagrams, you're trying to address that stakeholders in the form of a visual representation, which comes to my second point on this slide, which is a picture is worth 1,000 words. Diagramming is a language for administrators and really anyone to clearly communicate the what from the point of view of who, using shared and commonly accepted visualizations. So we're going to definitely dive deeper into what this all actually means in through my tips. But these are the importance of why we actually go about and make diagrams in the world of Salesforce. So let's jump in to the breakdown. And before you put pen to paper, so the first thing, if anyone has done diagrams before, the first thing you always want to do is jump right in and start building diagrams because someone asked you to do. But it's really important to actually, before you even start drag and dropping a square onto your diagram, talk about these 4 high-level questions. The first one is probably the most important one, and that is why. Why do the stakeholders need the diagram? And this is actually very important because, it would seem almost common sense as to why, but it's really important to take it back and who the stakeholder is. The example I use is you could have 2 stakeholders, different backgrounds, asking for the same diagram, but because of their use cases, it would change dramatically as to what you actually are going to diagram. For the example, if you have a stakeholder that's more concerned about training end users and they need a diagram of, let's say, onboarding a new customer in your Salesforce instance, their diagram will probably want to be very end user focused. They want the process to be probably very concrete, very specific on the steps, and help diagramming where data may, where they click buttons or what they're doing, whatever the actual diagram itself. On the other hand, you could have someone like me, a consultant, who comes in and goes, I want to know how your customers onboard in your system, and I want to know all the juicy bits. I want to know where things don't work, pain points. Well, you don't want to share that information to end users during a training session. So right there, you have the same diagram with completely 2 different use cases and types of information you may want to include in it. So that really sets the why of why you need the diagram. The next 2 columns here, who and what, and I'll be completely honest, these could be switched from each other, the who and the what, and they usually come very close together in the same conversation. They come with the same answer. So the who and what is really just talking about that who's involved, what actors are involved in the diagram. Is it end users, is systems, and so forth. So really describing who is involved in the system, and that's completely different than what the stakeholder is. Secondly, what are you the diagram and what level of detail should that go? So what you're trying to diagram is probably the easiest question on here, but we'll go into more detail of what it means about what level of detail do you need. And then finally, the how is the last part we'll get to in this presentation is actually how you're going to build this and where you're going to build this. So that really gets into more the technical side. So let's move on to the first tip of my presentation, and that is what's your viewpoint? And this is really answering the who and what side of that 2 middle columns we just looked at. First off, you really want to define the perspective of who and of what you'll be documenting in your diagram. A viewpoint is a common term used by solution architects to really frame where you're looking at. So if you're viewing the diagram, where you're looking from at the diagram, and then who's involved and the actors involved in the diagram. And those 2 information combines your viewpoint. And why we do this? Because it really sets the context to what the diagram is telling the users and helps frame what the concern that we talked about earlier of the stakeholder. So that's really what this who and what. And making sure you have this written down clearly before you even get to building your diagram is the most important part, because too many times without setting the viewpoint, you get halfway through your diagram and realize you have no direction to what the diagram needs to solve. And this step is easily solves that problem by having it upfront written down. It's like you're saying your thesis before you write your PhD. So that's tip 1, which then leads us into tip 2, to what level of detail you should go. So Salesforce in their solution architects use the C4 model, a visualizing software architecture. And the premise is pretty simple. There's 4 levels of detail, level 1 to level 4. Level 1 is your highest level. Think of it as your enterprise architecture, what systems are involved. And level 4 is all the way down to the level of what buttons you click, and almost down to almost a solution and that you could hand over to a developer to go build or configure. So, and the level 2s and 3s are in between. And what I want the audience to take away from this slide is you do not need to memorize levels 1 through 4. What it helps you do is guide you to what level of detail you should have in your diagram. And the most important tip from all of this is once you select the level of detail you want, you stick with the level of detail. For example, and I pulled this directly from Salesforce's architecture diagrams. Here's an example of a level 3 that Salesforce claims to be a level 3. Again, you don't have to memorize a level 3, but essentially it is a diagram that is just a bit above the absolute details of a flow, and it's really explaining what a commerce implementation is and where data and information flows between two different systems. And in this diagram, you can see we have a Service Cloud chatbot. It's live chat, and actually this is a good diagram because it has almost all the stuff labeled. And you see that Service Cloud chatbot that's highlighted in the middle. This is a really good start for a level 3 diagram. And of course, you'd probably want to add a bit more information, but the question is how much more information would you add to this? And one mistake you may make is, well, let's give that Service Cloud chatbot more information. Let's explain what happens in that Service Cloud chatbot. And before you know it, you have a messy diagram that's mixing level 3 and what's called level 4 diagram details in the same diagram. So what the question comes back to is, what's the viewpoint here? Who's actually reading this? Well, the users that just want a level 3 diagram, just knowing what features and capabilities are between the two systems, will completely look at this and get lost as to why there's so much details into how a chatbot is working, which might be a completely different audience of someone going, I want to know more about the chatbot. And the person that wants more about the chatbot does not understand why there's so much other information on the diagram that's useless to them. Next thing you know, you have 2 stakeholders now complaining about your one diagram, when in reality, it should have been 2 diagrams split out. Now we're going to move on to tip 3. And this one is a critical one for me. This is the stay on the path tip. So as much as we all think we are artists and we want to create our own new art, I would say, there is so much help out there and so many templates and so many standards that have been set over time through many uses over and over and over, that it's always best to go use someone else's template and then build upon top of that. Because this will help you, one, help communicate, because that's the whole point of this, is communicating your information, and standardize so that when you have to create another template, or someone else that's not you that's creating their template to share with the same stakeholders, you're all communicating with the same language, same colors, same resources. Luckily, selecting the right diagram and getting these templates is not as hard as it used to be. For one, Salesforce themselves provides a template gallery that you can go ahead and just download, and the link will be shared out. There are templates also that your colleagues may have used in the past. There is nothing wrong with going and cloning one of those and starting from there. Or you can go build your own from scratch that's not made from Salesforce, but there's still a starting point which will give you all the key components that you may need for that level 1, 2, 3, or 4 diagram. So there's tons of information and tons of resources out there that rarely do you have to start from scratch. That will move on to our tip 4. So now we are starting to get into the building of these diagrams. And I'm still talking, so you're at the point where you've selected your template, you've selected your viewpoint, who and what, the actors, you've kind of written this down, and you're ready to start actually building things in your diagram. And tip 4 really talks about kind of the consistency, things that you should keep in mind for it doesn't matter what template you're working with. And these are the 3 that I like to follow and like to make sure that it's ingrained with my colleagues. And that is, the first one is self-descriptive. If you were to take this diagram and drop it off in front of your stakeholders and then disappear for a year, would your stakeholders understand what your diagram is trying to say? This one was one that I struggled a lot earlier in my career, because going back to that artist side of me, I always wanted to make my diagram as clean and as straightforward as I possibly can. And there was a time where I would drop diagrams off and then I would be asked to join a meeting just to explain my diagram because a stakeholder couldn't understand it. And this is when I was a junior BA. And it was not until one of my mentors came across and said, well, just add a sticky note. You could have just had a sticky note and it would saved you an hour to be in this meeting just by having a sticky note explaining what the step was. And over time, I reluctantly agreed that sticky notes don't ruin your diagram. They help, if it helps give context and it prevents you from having to do that level 3, level 4 mistake that we showed earlier, this solves a lot of problems, gives context. It's better to share information, overshare some information in the form of sticky notes. Consistently consistent. So this is one where I push my clients to invest time and in with their BAs and their admins, is that making consistent templates just for even just colors and shapes. We spend so much time, companies spend so much time building out these PowerPoint presentation templates and all these other templates. They don't do the same thing, for example, a diagram. You know, what is your diagram colors? What are your standards internally? This is something that's really critical. I think a lot of companies could do better, making sure that just internally that you can pull a template color scheme that follows your branding and create a consistent presentation across all your diagrams. And third one I have here is accuracy. Is the diagram detailed and accurate enough that such that it won't confuse readers? Will it, and which is pretty self-explanatory, but the second point there is, will it require constant revisions over time? Sometimes, and we may have all had this, you create a diagram, everyone loves it, but they go, yep, we're going to use it in a couple of months. So a couple of months go by, they come back and they go, okay, I need that diagram now. You know, it's end of quarter. Now I really need that diagram to talk about, you know, whatever I was going to ask you, reason why. And you go, great, but you make the error of saying, yeah, but it's probably not up to date anymore. Whose fault is that? All that work you did back then may not be applicable now because it was not kept up to date. And the question is, what systems out there can you use to make sure that you are following up when something changes in the system? You are iterating and creating new versions. Is there even just a reminder that every 6 months, the owners of each diagram goes back and just reevaluates it? There's different systems that you can put in place. Again, it's more at the company level, but it's something that as admins, they're sitting here today watching this video, can go back and push to be implemented as part of training and part of their SOPs. All right. Finally, tip 5. And tip 5 is a multi-part section. First part, and all these tips are going to be talking about more about the diagram itself. So now we're getting into the actual nitty-gritty details of actually building out diagrams. And these are all ones that I personally have found over time, and talking with colleagues and working with admins over time, what are the most important things for me when I'm building any diagram. And the first one is reading left to right, top down. Every diagram, it's like a book. Most people's eyes will start in the top left corner and move down to the right. This is something that is just naturally progressive, most natural to people, even if they don't realize it. So when you are, for example, in this diagram, we have a retail storefront, solution architecture. You may think Salesforce is the most important thing in this diagram, but the truth is, if you're talking retail storefront, the first thing the user will look for in the diagram is commerce, the storefront itself. Having in the top left corner naturally progresses the eye. That will then move to the right as they learn more about in your diagram about how it connects to other systems. So this diagram is actually a great example of where the left to right, top down works. And this is something that you would kind of figure out as you start building your diagram. What's the most important for information and where do they start? And always try moving that as close to possible to the left corner. Add legends and guidance. This is a pretty self-explanatory one, but it's amazing how many times we forget to add that. If someone does not understand what an icon or color or whatever it may be in the document, you've already lost them, and the diagram is no longer communicating what you want. The last bullet point I have on this one is avoid mixing static and runtime elements. My example is if you have a data model or system, kind of similar to the one you see on the right here, you wouldn't also want to do process flow, runtime. Actually, that level 3, level 4 diagram mistake I showed earlier, that one is example of putting a process flow of how a chatbot will work together in a static model of where the systems are from a system standpoint. So that's a good example of avoiding those sort of information, because then you quickly lose and confuse your readers. All right, part 2. This is a bit more of, I would say, the user experience side of things when it comes to diagrams. The example actually I use here, the first one, grid alignment. This one actually, when I download this template from Salesforce, this was a mistake in their template, which I had to kind of laugh at because it was a perfect example of just readability. The first thing you just do is want to align it, make sure you use those grids where you can. And most tools, most modern tools, and this is using Lucidchart in this example, have those grid alignments. So they're pretty common tools across any visualization tool. Align it because what it does is for your readers, it less strains the eyes when they're trying to glance over it, because not everyone has all the time in the world to read your diagram. The more you can align things and make the eyes easier to read, makes feel less frustrated when it comes across, when it comes to readers reading your diagram. Use only one font type. This is one that usually comes in from a copy and paste area issue. So if you had 2 diagrams, you're copying and pasting something in from another diagram. The other one might use a different font type. Avoid that as much as you can. It's the same sort of situation as alignment. People may not realize it, but their eyes catch it, and it makes people frustrated and they may not even realize why they're frustrated. And that's because maybe the font type changes. If you do need to use fonts to show importance, use font weight. Bold is the best example, but you can do sizing as well. So use that as well, but don't change the font itself. And then finally, use contrasting colors to make elements pop. A lot of these examples, you'll see there's a lot of white space, and then the colors themselves that you do see are there for a particular reason, to really keep your eyes glued to where they need to be in the diagram. All right. I think we're coming down near the end of my slides, but here's one, part 3, utilize layers and subdiagrams. So going back to my tip about Post-it notes, I still wanted to find a way to make my diagrams beautiful, even with that Post-it note example and my mentor telling me use Post-it notes. So one of these tools that's kind of more modern, and this is the Lucidchart example, is that you can implement layers. And what a layer is simply saying you have your base layer, and then you can add optional layers on top that you can hide or show. After I get to a certain level of my diagram where I feel it's very in a solid place, I would move all my Post-it notes to a different layer. And then when I need to take a print of my diagram without the Post-it notes, I can just simply remove it and download it. And then when I need to bring them back on, when I may be talking or walking through with a client, I can pop it back on, and it's easy just like that. And then my other last bullet point here is, if your diagram becomes way too complex and you're trying to smash too many things into one diagram, it's, I don't follow the 1-page rule, but if it's starting to become a novel, try breaking it down to multiple different diagrams. It would also help you with the accuracy and maintenance side of things that we talked about in tip 4. All right, and this is my final slide, I promise. Building the diagram. So this is the promote reusability. So even once you build your templates, you built your diagram, how do you help the next person coming down with the same journey? And there's multiple ways to do it. One, reuse standard icon sets. So Salesforce provides icon sets. This is the Lucidchart example again. Create your own custom reusable assets and share it with colleagues. Lucidchart gives you the ability to create and package your own. It goes with, again, that standard templates, colors, and so forth. Share that, and then maintain a structured folder system so that users and other end users can come find your template, copy it, and go forth using my tip 3, which is reuse the previous people's work. So that is it from my tips for today. So just a recap for these tips for when you create a new diagram: understand why and selecting your viewpoint, your who and what, select a level of detail, and most importantly, stick with it. Stay on the path by using existing templates, ensure consistency, self-descriptions, and accuracy. And finally, utilize the tools that are you have available to you and promote sharing and reusability. There's many helpful resources that I've kind of gone through today, but here are the links. And that's it for today. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.